Hello everybody, welcome to another episode of The Comic Source. I'm your host Jace, here to talk today about Comixology original graphic novel. I have the writer, very talented gentleman. You may know him from things like, God, you've worked on Buffy and Smallville and Spartacus and Daredevil, a lot of fantastic television shows. But we're here today to talk about your Comixology project. Stephen S. DeKnight joining me to tell us about Beneath. Stephen, thanks for taking the time.
Hey, it's my pleasure. Thanks for having me. And yeah, all those, I've been so fortunate to work on some really fantastic genre stuff in the television space.
Yeah, it's fair to say you know story at this point with all the things that you have worked on, beloved properties. When it comes to Beneath, give us the elevator pitch and tell us a little bit about kind of the impetus of the project. Like, what was it about this story? And we'll get into some of the political aspects of it and what have you, because you have a little essay in the back that I want to touch on as well. But give us an idea of coming up with the original idea and developing it a little bit.
Yeah, the elevator pitch is a group of very different individuals with different viewpoints stuck in a for-profit detention center trying to survive until the sun comes up, where there's something, as the title says, there's something beneath the ground. So, how this came about was I had a meeting years ago with Universal about their classic monster collection. And it was one of the many times they were trying to reboot the whole classic Universal monsters. And they said, hey, take a look at the catalog. They gave me a thumb drive with all the movies on it and said, take a look at these and see if anything pops out at you. Of course, some of the bigger ones were already taken. The Invisible Man was already in the works. Creature from the Black Lagoon. I think Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Frankenstein, all the really well-known ones, right. Which was fine because I was looking for something that I could take a general concept from or inspiration from. And way at the bottom of the list was an old 1930s movie called The Mole People. If anybody remembers that movie, it was kind of like Lost Horizon with creatures, where basically this group comes across, I think it's in the mountains, this underground civilization that's very much utopian. Except doing all the heavy lifting and all the work were the mole people, which, just like it sounds, it was like a human crossed with a mole, and they were slaves. And really didn't have anything to do with the movie, The Mole People. They're just background slaves until the third act where they all went bananas and revolted and started killing everybody. So I thought, hey, there might be something there. So I came up with a concept that really had nothing to do with the movie or the Mole People. It was just the idea of something underground. And so I married that with an idea I had many years ago when I was trying to remake the giant atomic ant movie, Them.
Oh, great movie.
Yeah, that's where the opening of the graphic novel comes from, because I had this opening for Them where it was undocumented immigrants crossing the border and getting sucked underground, and you find out later it's giant radioactive ants. That never came to fruition, but it always stuck in the back of my head like a great opening for a movie. So I kind of married those two together and then started pulling inspiration from all the things I love, which one of them is Assault on Precinct 13, John Carpenter's movie, which I saw when I was a kid, and I just absolutely loved it. And it's so smart because it's budget friendly. It stays in a contained location. So I thought, well, how can I take all of these different elements and also make it mean something? Because I love genre that has some kind of social relevance and a message. It doesn't have to hit you over the head, but it's nice to have it there. And that's at the time when I was thinking about the project is when the for-profit immigration detention centers popping up everywhere, and you were hearing all kinds of stories of abuse and packing in as many people as possible to turn a profit. And I thought, well, that's an interesting place to set it, because that way I can have a group of people. You can have the racist, anti-Mexican element that the self-proclaimed, the three percenters, the vigilantes patrolling the border, the citizen vigilantes, mixed in with the people who were just doing their jobs, and then of course the undocumented immigrants that are there, the last people there before the whole place is closed down. And throwing into that a deputy who's first generation Mexican American, who sees both sides of the issue, but has a bigger problem to solve, which is how to stay alive until the sun comes up. So it's like all of those classic horror creature feature elements with a sprinkle of social relevance really got me excited about the project. And I thought about it as a feature, and then I've always loved comics and graphic novels, and I've been dying to tell a full story. And I thought, well, let me explore to see if I could set this up as a comic, which was very interesting to me, and also a lot less interference, because once you start making a movie, you've got 20 people telling you what you should do. Mm-hmm. And I really just wanted to focus on telling the best story I could. And originally I was talking to IDW about doing it, and then my main contact there left the company and said, hey, you should talk to my friend over at Comixology, which I did, and we hit it off and made a deal immediately. And then the next big thing for this book was the art, mm-hmm. Which is, to me, more important than the writing. The art has to be fantastic. And I got an editor in Canada, Alison O'Toole, which was fantastic. And, we talked about what style I was looking for. And she said, let me do some thinking. And she came back and said, what do you think about Michael Gaydos? And I said, I love Michael Gaydos. We'll never get him. Jesus, he did Alien with Brian Michael Bendis. I've been a huge fan of his art for years and years and years. She reached out to him, and it just so happened. I think he was interested in doing a horror book and had space in his schedule and signed on. And to me, that's when the project really took off. Every time I look at this book, I love what he did with the art so much. And the great thing about Michael is he does his own art and his own colors. Mm-hmm. So that's why the colors are so unique. If you look at the book, it's a different color palette for each section depending on what's going on. For when you're out in the desert, for when you're inside the facility, for when the lights go off. He just did a brilliant job all around.
Yeah, he really did, setting the tone, and this is a real page turner. So let me tell you, Stephen. So I got the preview copy so I could read it before we chatted, and I hadn't had a chance to read it yet, and it was like super late at night. And I'm like, man, I really need to go to bed. It was like 1:30 in the morning, and I'm like, I'm just going to read the first few pages, and I'll finish it, the next day or whenever, because this was a few days ago. I started reading. I couldn't put it down. I stayed up till like 2 in the morning.
Well, that's great to hear.
Yeah, reading the whole thing. It's a real page turner, and the way that you build the suspense. We don't even actually see the what's beneath. We don't discover them until like Act 2. It's like halfway through the book, so it gives you that sense of danger and threat and foreboding. And then when they do show up, they're horrific. I mean, Michael just did a fantastic job. But in terms of the actual story, and maybe you can speak to this. You mentioned the different people that are trying to survive, and they've got different political viewpoints and what have you. And the layering of that and the way they play off each other adds kind of this other element of like making it a compelling read, in addition to you want to know, what the monsters are and what have you. So is that something that comes naturally in your writing, like that interaction between characters, especially ones with differing viewpoints, or was it just something specific for the story that kind of clicked?
It's part and parcel with how I was trained in the TV world. I was very fortunate to come up through the system when we were doing 22 episodes a year with Buffy, Angel, and Smallville.
Right.
So I got a lot of practice. And, the budgets were always tight, so you always had to lean very strongly on character. And that's something I really wanted to bring to the book. And I'm also fantastically influenced by Stephen King. Like anyone from my generation, I just absorbed everything I could from him. And his plots, his setups are fantastic. But what makes him sing is his characters.
Mm-hmm.
His character work is so fantastic, and that always stuck with me moving forward with my own writing. And then the other side of the coin is the plotting for this. I have another graphic novel with humanoids, and I approach both the same way that I would approach if I was writing a feature script, which a very clear three-act structure, and that to me helps propel the story forward. So there's always that forward momentum, and it's I really wanted to stick to that here. Like you said, you really don't see the creatures into the midpoint,
Mm-hmm.
which was exactly how I wanted to plan it out. I wanted to build that tension and then reveal what they're dealing with. And then you've got the second half of how they deal with it. Also, because I was originally half thinking this might be a movie, there's budgetary issues, of course. Every time you would have one of these creatures on screen, you're burning money. So I really wanted to take also a page from the old Val Lewton movies like Cat People, where they had two dimes to rub together. So it was a lot of shadows and tension and building that up. So all that together really put the focus on the characters. And for me, the best horror movies are with characters that really suck you in. Carrie is a great example. The characters are so great, and not surprisingly coming from the Stephen King novel, is that if you can get the audience to really get sucked into the characters and the interactions, then you're really cooking. I also think of James Cameron's Aliens. It's the character interactions really are what make that movie rise above other similar fare.
Yeah, you know what? I'm glad you brought that up. It wasn't necessarily, it's something I wanted to touch on. It wasn't necessarily my next question, but let's go there. One of the things, one of the classic lines from Aliens, Sigourney Weaver says to Paul Reiser, I don't know what's worse. We don't see them selling each other out for a percentage or what have you. And I mentioned that the little bit of the essay you had in the back and talking about, there's these monsters or what, however you want to label them underground, that are, horrific and killing people and whatever, but sort of in their nature, they're not really going, it's just what they are, what they do. So are they truly the monsters as opposed to, these other members of society that are dehumanizing others that are just trying to have a better life? Again, you like to tell stories that have kind of a social message. And again, we're talking about Aliens was 1986, and here we are, 30 plus, years later, and we're still having the same conversation. Like, man, I really think we ought to be doing better by now, but unfortunately we're not.
You would think. Yeah. It's that classic story point, who's the real monsters?
Exactly.
And again, this was the perfect vehicle for that, to see the betrayals, the double crosses, the things that happen with the humans are really far worse than the creatures.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, I just feel like we could all do with a little more empathy, and that's all it would take,
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully, not to get political here, but hopefully that's where we're heading now, with a sense of hope and joy and just love and concern for our fellow man.
But it does go back to, we're talking about Alien, but really we can go back to those classic Universal stories. Again, you touched on it in the essay, this idea that, even back then, you can look at Frankenstein's monster, you can look at, any number of those, trying to create life and, putting yourself above God and those kind of messages that we just don't seem to learn, but it sure makes for fertile ground for storytelling, don't you think?
It does. It really does. I mean, it's you can't go wrong with having those elements in your story, because again, it goes to human nature and character flaws and interactions, which to me is always the most fertile ground of any story. You need a compelling plot to hang that on, but if you just have a compelling plot with all of that without all that stuff in it, your story is going to fall flat.
Well, throughout your career, you've worked on a lot of genre stuff, as you mentioned, and I think genre storytelling is really the best way to kind of start these conversations. If you make a morality tale and it's, set in modern times, whatever, it can come across, I think, as preachy sometimes.
Yeah.
But if you kind of disguise it with monsters or science fiction or whatever, we're entertained, first of all, but then in the back of our mind, again, it can start those conversations. So I think genre really lends itself to this type of storytelling and kind of getting this message across. Not that you're trying to trick anybody, but I think it's a kind of a better delivery system. Would you agree with that?
Oh, without a doubt. One of the things when I did Spartacus, it's a big, sexy, violent action show.
Mm-hmm.
But the message I was trying to get across is that in the U.S. and in other countries, there's an economic slave class. You have the super rich, and you have the people just toiling, trying to make it day to day.
Right.
Super rich want them to stay that way. So there's a lot of big speeches in Spartacus, and there's even one in Daredevil where Ben Urich is talking about Wilson Fisk, and he talks about people behind the shadows where, no amount of money is enough. They have to take it all.
Yeah.
So I think these kind of genre shows are just perfect to weave in social messages where you don't have to hit people over the head. You still, the most important thing with any of these is to entertain your audience,
mm-hmm.
and then slip this stuff in so it's not didactic and overbearing.
Yeah, exactly. But we're thinking about it later, and it can engender conversations. Well, one other thing that I noticed, and maybe you can speak to this in terms of, your past work in live action, and then having to switch over to doing this, obviously, which is completely different, although still a collaboration between a narrative and visual. One of the things that people that don't have a lot of experience writing comics, I think that they kind of struggle with a little bit, and that was not the case with this at all. It was a real page turner. Is the pacing? The pacing
Mm-hmm.
can be tough to get right. Again, if you're coming from a different medium. So was that something you were conscious with the pacing, how it kind of ramped up as it went along? Did it help with Michael's art and the way he was slowly revealing things? Talk a little bit about that aspect of building the story.
Oh, yeah. I mean, pacing is so important. And again, for me, coming from television features, particularly features, since this has more of a feature length and feel,
Mm-hmm.
You got to be cognizant of that pacing. That's why I try to have certain things happen at certain points. There's a very clear end to Act 1. There's a very clear middle of Act 2. There's a very clear end of Act 2 and propelling us into the finale. And with comics, the thing that's different is I always say working in comics, it's where art and math intersects. Because with comics, you have a limited number of panels per page,
mm-hmm.
and I'm always very cognizant. I try never to do more than 5 panels a page, and for me, that's purely because I want the artist to have enough room to really work their craft.
Mm-hmm.
Could you put 12 panels in a page? Sure, but the artist is going to be working like that and not have the full range. So you have to be very cognizant about how many panels per page. You also have to be very cognizant of where the pages are laid out. Like page 1, single page, you see it. You open that up, you've got page 2 and 3. So that can be a double splash page, or, the story just follows along. What you want to try to do is have any surprises or revelations on the flip, so the reader isn't ahead of the game. So, and that gets really, really complicated, especially because inevitably the artist will say, well, we need to add a page here.
Yeah.
Not enough room. And it's like, well, we got to add another page over here because everything needs to lay out. And then you've got to hit it in a certain page range. Thankfully, with graphic novels, you've got a little bit more leeway than like a 22-page or a 20-page comic. That's like serious math where you really got to stick it just right. With a graphic novel, like with this one, we had to deliver at least 100 pages, and I think it ended up being like a 112 or something. So yeah, that pacing has to be built in, and unlike a screenplay where I can have like a very loose outline and I can still hit those, with the comics, I have to do like a very, very precise outline where I don't break it down panel by panel, but I break it down page by page. Okay, this is what I have to end on this page. This is what I have to start on the next page. Otherwise, you're going to get into a pacing problem, and you're going to box yourself into a corner with a big revelation before it should happen.
So experiencing that and going through those challenges and putting the puzzle together, I'm sure there's a satisfaction in doing a good job. Does this come from like just a background of reading comics, or was it something that you kind of had to learn when you kind of started doing some comic work?
Definitely a learning curve. But I've read comics since I was a little kid in the early 70s. I love comics. I love graphic novels. I originally wanted to be a comic book artist, except I didn't quite have the talent. So yeah, I just love everything about the art form, and it's truly an art form. But then when you actually have to sit down and write it, the first comic I ever wrote was one issue of the Buffy comic when I was working on Dollhouse. And yeah, it was a revelation. I was writing with too many panels, and I didn't quite have a handle on it. And then we did 4 issues of a Spartacus tie-in. It got a little bit better. And then it was many years until I did my next comic work, which I believe was a little 10-page story in King Size Conan for Marvel, and that went well. And I did I think another 10-page story with Wolverine and Sauron, and that led to a couple of Wastelander comics. And so I was able to get my feet wet. And then after doing that, the desire and the hunger to do a bigger piece really set in. I definitely got the fever. But I really wanted to do something either creator-owned or creator-driven instead of working with other existing characters. I love reading those, but as a time versus money kind of situation,
Right.
I once sat down and said, okay, if I was just going to be a comic book writer, how many comics would I have to write a month to equal what I'm doing in television and make that? And it turned out to be like 72,000 comics a month, which even I can't do.
Right.
So that's when I kind of refocused towards graphic novels. And also instead of an ongoing series, which sometimes my time commitments won't allow.
Mm-hmm.
But I've got the real bug for graphic novels now. I would love to keep writing those. It scratches a creative itch that I've had for years and years since I was a kid.
Well, if the quality of Beneath is any indication, fit it in your schedule whenever you can, because I want to read more stuff. And again, we want to give a lot of credit to Michael Gaydos as well. To have your first, big full-length thing that is creator-owned that you've invested in, to have him on board with the art. I mean, really, you were very fortunate, I would say.
I pinch myself every day when I think about it. I mean, every time I look at this cover, and, we were talking about the cover, and, I don't even think we got into specifics. It was just, I don't want like creatures coming out of the ground or anything. I want something more atmospheric. Mm-hmm. And he sent me this, and it's like, holy shit, yes, that is exactly it. That is just a wonderful cover.
Yeah, it's amazing. So again, everybody, it's available on Comixology. If you have the Comixology Unlimited subscription, which I highly recommend, I think it's like $6.99 a month or something like that, then you get all these Comixology originals included, along with a lot of other Marvel, DC, Dark Horse, just a ton of stuff. Or you can go and purchase this and just read it as a single. Highly recommend it. It's just a fantastic story. It's, as I said, a real page turner. And I want to congratulate you, Stephen, on such a fantastic kind of first effort for a big, meaty graphic novel.
Thank you very much. It was a real labor of love.
As we're winding down here, anything else you want to share with our audience?
Yeah, well, I've got the spinoff to my original Spartacus series coming out next year called House of Asher. check it out. If you were a fan of the original show, I think you'll dig it. And I also have another graphic novel coming out later this year from Humanoids called Hard Bargain. That one's a two-fisted 1940s Los Angeles private detective getting ensnared in a very unusual supernatural case. I think if you like Beneath, I think you'll dig that one too.
Fantastic. Well, we'll have to have you back on when the time's right to talk about that.
I would love to.
So if people want to follow along with your work, know when these projects are coming out, where's the best place? Do you have a presence online at all?
Yeah, I'm on Twitter, if you can stomach it. I refuse to call it X.
So do I.
Yeah, just search for my name, Stephen DeKnight, all lowercase letters. You'll see me there making trouble on a daily basis. And that's pretty much my largest footprint. I'm on Instagram, which I poke in on occasionally. But, yeah, if you want to poke me with a question or ask me anything, Twitter would be the place.
All right, I'll put a link to Steven's Twitter in the show notes, everybody, as well as a link to the Comixology page for Beneath in the show notes. So if you're having trouble finding either, you can go there. Again, highly recommend Beneath. And once you've checked it out, be sure to reach out to Steven and tell him how awesome it is, because it really, really is just a fantastic read.
Well, thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, it's been great catching up, talking about this project. Again, congrats. It is a real page turner. And, yeah, I look forward to more of your comic work as well as your television work in the future.
Oh, thanks so much, man.
And to our audience, whether you're listening on the audio feed or on YouTube, we appreciate you joining us. We appreciate the support as always, and we'll talk to you next time.